Today I'm taking 3 of the most innocent and heartwarming kids movies and transforming them into terrifying horror posters. In my last video I asked you guys to comment the word chicken, which you lot definitely didn't disappoint. And that might have just been a cheeky little hint to the first design in this video, Chicken Little. A story about an alien invasion and talking farm animals. But what if the aliens aren't quite as friendly as they are in the movie? First we'll start with this night sky background. Then using a pen tool I'll create a UFO style laser beam shape and fill it with this luminous green. Next we'll grab our unfortunate little chicken friend, bin off the background and drop him straight in. However, the laser's looking a little too flat for my liking. So let's fix that by adding an inner orange glow with this brighter green outer glow. Finally, I'll give it a quick Gaussian blur to add a bit more realism. To make the chicken feel more absorbed in the beam, I'll switch to blending mode to overlay. And just like the beam, I'll add a couple of glowing effects to him just to give him that more sci-fi look. Alright, let's bring in our alien spaceship. This UFO should do rather nicely. I'll give it a slight tilt, place it at the top of our canvas, and of course do a quick clean up so the beam actually looks like it's coming out of the ship. I didn't feel like this blue sky was working too well, so instead I painted over the background and adjusted the blending mode to create a much darker scene with this creepy green tint. And then I'll add the same green overlay to the spaceship and let's give that an eerie green glow as well. Okay, so this isn't looking too impressive just yet, so let's change that with some details. I'll start by adding these electric PNGs, which when paired with the right blending mode made the beam feel much more alive. I'm also bringing in this glowing sci-fi portal to act as a secondary light source coming from inside the ship. And finally, these creepy alien hands should really crank up the horror. I'll place them reaching out like whatever's waiting inside the ship just can't wait to cook him up into some tasty fried chicken. I'm now going to bring in this floating image of some debris and change the blending mode so it reads as small particles and dirt within the laser beam. And I love these electric bolt elements so much that I decided to just place them on either side of the beam as well, which helps him frame the composition really nicely. These alien hands could also do with being pushed behind a portal lighting, as I realised this would look much more realistic. I then had the idea of giving Chicken Little this almost possessed trance-like stare, as if the beam is slowly taking control of his body. These eerie glowing green eyes should do the trick. And let's just finish that off by cutting out the glasses frame so the eyes sit properly behind them. Next, I'll quickly adjust the lighting using a low exposure mask, erasing around the main light sources and details to keep everything feeling balanced. With the raw design complete, it's time to bring this whole thing into the camera raw filter. This is where we can really bring the image to life with a few final photo adjustments. Finally, all that's left to do is add the movie logo. I'll give it a few different shadows and inner glows to help it sit nicely within the design. And just like that, here's our horror movie poster for Chicken Little. I think darkening the sides really helped push that mysterious alien abduction vibe. Now that design was cool, but this next one is probably one of my favorites in this whole entire series. Set in a lawless Wild West town, we have none other than Rango. And for this one, I knew exactly what I had to do once I saw this poster. Let's start, of course, with our image of Rango. Using a pen tool, I'll make a selection around both of his arms, which we can now place on a separate layer. Next, I'll search for an image of Rango's love interest, Beans. And let's just go ahead and drop her head into his arms.
What am I doing with my life?
We've still got this fish in the way though, so I'll take a selection from Rango's shirt and start layering it over the top. Using the pen tool, I'll follow the shape of his shirt to make sure everything blends in properly. I'll then sample some of the blue from the sky and gently paint over the area to smooth it out. Now all that's left is to get rid of his fishy tail. I'll first match the background colours, and then being a little bit cheeky, let's use some generative fill to take care of the rest. Perfect. I'm also not a huge fan of how Bean's hair sits down here, so let's just clean that up. And his shoulder also needs to blend more naturally into the rest of her hair. Alright, now it's time to bring in the gore. This dripping blood texture should do nicely. I'll paint in a subtle shadow just above to give it a bit of depth. Then using a colour overlay to push it towards a more realistic darker red. I'll also add this pretty gruesome texture on top, painting in a few low exposure shadows to really sell the realism. For the eyes, I'll paint over them on a new layer so I can drop in these much creepier ones instead. Then let's darken the edges with some shadows to give it a bit more of a sunken, hollow look. And although it doesn't make too much sense, I feel like this dripping blood coming from my eyes will add a seriously sinister touch. Let's switch to blending mode to darken to deepen my colour, and then I'll repeat the process for the other eye. I also thought pushing the pupils slightly upwards could help sell that eerie sort of rolled back horror look. Using a low exposure mask, I'll paint some shadows behind Rango's arms. Now despite how gruesome our design is, nothing actually suggests that Rango is the culprit, so let's change that. I think bringing in this axe should do the trick. And let's throw on a splash of blood on the blade to show it's been in recent use. And finally, let's just paint in a few shadows along the bottom of the handle to help it sit properly within his hand. Now, as we've established many times in this series, evil characters need evil red eyes. So let's quickly dab those in. However, it's still all looking a bit too clean, so let's add in some blood blood on his hands and even on beams to really push that horror look. Now, one little trick that I'll let you guys in on to boost that cinematic look is painting over your characters with a low exposure mask set to hard light. This really just deepens the shadows and saturates the colors, which just makes everything pop and look so much more cinematic. Now for the background. I'll swap in this desert image, but instead of centering it, I'm going to bring it to the side and blend it into a second one alongside it. That way, Rango isn't blocking all the lovely cactus details. I'll then add this dust cloud texture and adjust the blending mode to dirty up the foreground a little.
The dirtier the better.
Followed by another pass where I softly erase the harsher edges. And a little touch in this corner should work nicely too. And we're still not done with the horror, so let's place this puddle of blood just behind him. Then we'll use a Gaussian blur to blend it naturally into the ground. For the movie title, I'll bring it just above his head and pop it behind. Then let's adjust the color overlay to match the color tones lower down. And from there, it's just a case of playing around with different inner shadow effects. But the real icing on the cake was definitely once I dropped in this textured layer over the top, which just gave everything such a more gritty, dystopian Wild West feel. And for the final detail, I add this pile of skulls, which really adds to that idea of a deserted, crime-filled wasteland. After a few tweaks in the camera raw filter and a couple of finishing touches, I present to you a horror Wild West poster for Rango. I genuinely can't get over the type treatment on this one. I just feel like that logo came out so well. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. And if you've made it this far in the video, comment the word panda. I absolutely loved reading all your chicken comments in the last one. And you never know, that might just be a hint for the next video. And with that, my friends, we move on to the final movie, Disney Pixar's Soul. What happens when our buddy Joe is suddenly tasked with collecting everyone's souls? First up, let's start with Joe. And I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and extend the image using generative fill to give us more of his torso to work with. Then let's spin off the background. For Joe's new criminal profession, it only feels right to cover his identity with this face mask. I'll lower the saturation slightly so it matches the rest of his outfit. However, he's still looking a little bit too friendly, so let's fix that. I'll make a selection around one eyebrow and rotate it until he's frowning. Then, using the colours sampled from his face, I'll gently paint over the original eyebrow and blend in the new one so it sits naturally behind his glasses. Of course, we'll then repeat that process for the other eye. Looking good. Next, let's gear him up. I'll add some weapons to his back to make sure he's ready for his first day of soul collecting. I really like the idea of using scythes, almost like he's doing the Grim Reaper's work.
Give me that sight.
These smaller blades on his shoulders could definitely double as some close combat weapons too. For the background, I'm going to bring in this fiery scene of a house engulfed in flames. Then let's extend it into the foreground with this black brush. To help it blend more naturally, I'll add these smoke PNGs and adjust the blending mode so they add texture and depth to the darkness behind him. I'll then use my cinematic lighting trick and paint over any areas with a low exposure layer. Then switch to blending mode and clean up any spots we don't want. Now let's blend in his weapons into the scene using some subtle inner shadows and color overlays to tone down that original reflective metal. I'll also change these smaller weapons towards a warmer color tone to reflect the flames in the background. To add a bit more realism, I'll use a puppet warp on this leather strap so it wraps naturally over his shoulder. Then erase the top so it fades behind the mask. I just think this strap really sells the idea that Joe's carrying multiple weapons, helped by these utility style belts. Now this next part is where the story gets a little bit muddy, so I need you guys to help me out in the comments. I felt like the background just needed one more hit of horror, so I added these scarecrows, which look really cool, but now they need to make sense. Maybe Joe's weapon turns people into scarecrows after their souls are collected, who knows. But one thing is certain, the poster definitely looks really cool with them in it. With the background looking pretty solid, let's bring in some focus into the foreground. I'll use these fire overlays and switch to blending mode to screen. Then erase around Joe's body so the flames sit naturally in front of him. I'll repeat this with a few different overlays, layering them up to add more depth and realism to our scene. Now we're nearly finished with the design, but it's still looking a bit too clean. So to fix that, I'll add these blood stains to his weapons to really push that horror. And it's not just the weapons, let's also add in some small amounts of blood across different areas of his outfit. And with all this fire in the scene, it only makes sense to add some warm orange highlights reflecting along the sides of him. It's the little details like this that just end up making such a huge difference in the final outcome. Next, we'll run the design through the camera raw filter, but we're not quite done just yet because we still need to add the movie title. I'll use this font, but erase the star inside as it doesn't really fit the vibe. Then I'll add this texture on top and change the color overlay to a bold fiery red. Finally, I'll place this shadow PNG behind to help separate the title from the background. And with that, our Soul horror poster is complete. Let me know what you guys think of this one. It definitely gives me some sort of Van Helsing vampire hunter type vibes. So that brings this episode of horror poster redesigns to an end. Let me know which one of these three was your favorite, and as always, drop any suggestions for the next episode in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, then why not check out one of these two here. Until next time guys, I'll see you in the next one in a bit.